Welcome, my name's Steph Webb. I'm a principal partner for Police and Infrastructure at TPX. And tonight we're talking about AI in planning. So we think that AI can improve how data is analysed in the system. Actually, I'll stop. Obviously, AI made that slide. I'm not going to do an AI-driven set of slides. What we will do instead is what an AI couldn't do, which is start with a really poncy French quote. So I'm not going to mangle the French language by actually saying this. Thankfully, the internet also helps me translate it. So this is by the French Chief Data Officer from 2018, who said, we need to invent a vocabulary around algorithms, because algorithms were the thing then, to break free from the reign of experts. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, you can replace algorithms with AI or any other technology. And tonight we're going to kind of talk about, I think, the vocabulary. One of the key things is kind of how do we translate and bridge the divide, the linguistic and technical divide between kind of planning and digital and AI. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the reign of experts, that bit of it, because that's the bit that kind of fascinates me, and it's always fascinated me when it comes to technology, but I think AI might have particular help when it comes to that. So some moons ago, 10 years ago, myself and colleagues built this thing, which was to free us from the reign of experts, because historically, experts would go out and get data about electricity capacity. So this is what it's showing you. It's showing you kind of heat maps of where there is more or less electricity capacity or water capacity, and those experts would then, put that in a report and give you the report. But the data was there, and this led me to realise that that's just one slice of planning. How can you get everyone to have that kind of level of insight and expertise from understanding where infrastructure capacity may be? And another thing that I think is part of the reign of experts is demonstrated by this. And thank you for Dan Hill, who took this photo many years ago, but I've now got a literal bank of mutilated planning notices that show the people's kind of distrust of the front page, as it were, of the planning system for many people. And the way that site notice is written, the Town and Country Planning Act of 1947, that's not a great way for experts to kind of communicate it. And perhaps we think, or I have had the belief that, technology, but in particular AI, is really good at amassing lots of data and seeing patterns in that data, but also kind of translating things from one language to another. So some moons ago, we thought about what the future might be like. How might you have far more data kind of feeding into your local plan or a city plan, and where tech companies or AI and planning experts are kind of working together to harvest that data, to understand land availability, housing demand, and where kind of policymakers can tweak those policies in more like real time, where property developers can kind of submit digital versions or BIM models perhaps of their planning applications, and where citizens can kind of engage realistically with what's going on in their neighborhood. They can kind of see and understand all of that data that's going in there. And a book that really influenced me at the time that's really relevant now, this is 2015, this book was published, Future of the Professions. Richard Susskind, who was a legal kind of professor, looked at, and if you read it again now, it was pretty prescient in terms of what it predicted and how certain professions would change in light of technology and AI. But one of the really interesting things for me about professions is they grew, be you a surveyor, be you a planner, be you an architect, like they grew from the fact that it's really difficult for one person to hold all those different rules in their head, the rules that govern architecture, engineering. But actually AI perhaps offers the ability to learn all of those rules at once and understand them. And what might that mean for kind of the shape of modern professions? And we all know, and we'll get on to kind of how LLMs, a type of AI, are prone to errors, and how, like, when we're doing public applications of AI, we'll certainly want and need, even more so, professionals in the loop, kind of judging what is good quality. But we know already that AI is going to be in the hands of citizens, and they will be more empowered to have more relatively expert views. So what will become of public engagement where, both the YIMBYs and the NIMBYs have the expertise, inverted commas, that's driven by AI, but also then how might we kind of harness that AI for good? And then kind of finally, the other key bit for me around professions is like how professions arose to manage liability. And I think this is going to be a really big issue as AI is deployed in more and more places. So, the planner, the structural engineer, their signature implied authorization and a kind of route to recourse if something goes wrong. So how do we manage that liability when there's more and more AI? And do the RTPI, do MHCLG, do DESNES kind of need to stand behind certain AI solutions to enable them to be scaled? So that's enough for me. That was a bit of an introduction into some of the kind of challenges we have. I'm going to let each of our experts introduce themselves and use their own vocabulary to kind of talk through kind of their views of AI and public services and planning. So I'll hand over to Duncan first.
Hello, thanks. My name is Duncan Brown. I'm the head of software engineering at the Incubator for AI, which is part of the Digital Centre of Government, GDS. And our role is to effectively act on government's duty to make the most of AI and put it to use for the public good. I'm going to sort of get concrete just for a minute or two and tell you about a tool that we've recently developed, which I think opens up quite a lot of those questions, but sticks really quite firmly down at the data layer. So we have this project Extract that the Prime Minister announced at London Tech Week back in June. So this is a tool we developed in partnership with the digital planning team at MHCLG. And what it does is it looks at paper planning documents effectively, and it parses out Article 4 directions, tree preservation orders, conservation areas, and locally listed buildings. And it structures that data in exactly the way that the digital planning platform wants and needs. And that feeds tools like PlanX and other digital planning tools. So if you've got this data, which a very small proportion of councils have today, then you can use those tools to really radically reduce the amount of time it takes for you to assess a planning application, say from 6.5 days to 1 1/3 days, so a sort of fivefold speed up that we saw in Doncaster Council with PlanX. And there are a handful, as I say, of local authorities that have this data, but the overwhelming majority don't. And in fact, MHCLG is paying councils to digitize their data. So it's a really arduous process to do it. So it takes you typically 1 to 2 hours per document for someone to sit there, read all the handwritten scribblings and crossings out, and look at the different date stamps that affect the validity of the document, and trace the drawings on the maps into plots on real sort of digital maps, real digital maps. What sort of world are we living in? So Extract does all this in about 40 seconds and costs about 10p per document. So really, really speeds up this, frankly, quite boring work. So we're planning to make this available to all local authorities by spring 2026. And we're also planning to open source all of the code and underlying tech this autumn so that all of the other exciting applications that could fall out of this can fall out of it. And our hope is that this will really augment and not replace people's labor in a way that's clear, that's really accountable, because it stops at the creation of the data. It doesn't go on to make decisions. Hopefully we'll talk about that today. And basically just a little bit boring. And that's where we see the value in the system right now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Duncan. So no doubt we'll talk more about Extract as we go along, but I'm going to pass over to Paul now. Paul.
Hi, everyone. Really good to see you. I'm Paul Maltby. I'm the director of the public service teams at Faculty. And Faculty is an applied AI company that for 10 years has been making bespoke AI services for clients to help their organizations work better. The other relevance of me being here, I'll talk in a minute about some of the work we've done on planning, is that I was previously the Chief Digital Officer at MHCLG, and back in 2017, we think maybe, with Steph, Ewan, and some others, basically going, look, there's a thing here about the planning system and data and housing and land that is massively underappreciated, and there's going to be a big future on that. So it's been amazing for me to see amazing folks like IAI do their work on Extract, and to see that backed by the PM and others has been like a really lovely, heartwarming sort of moment for me professionally over the last couple of weeks or so. If you can move, if you've got those. So I just want to, so what, 3 years or so ago, left MHCLG. If you go to the next slide, but we've been doing this stuff with faculty of MHCLG in a similar way to what Duncan and team's been doing, looking at how else can we use AI to get the data in a better state. So there's a few different examples. If you flip onto the next one classic, perennial and really boring problem you may know is like the documentation just moves around on the web. So you just want to find the right document. Is this the right document? Oh my word, it's changed its title, it's slightly changed its content, and it doesn't, like the link is broken. So we've basically made a first sort of prototype tool to basically be able to find the right documents in the council planning sites to make sure that those things were not getting lost and weren't corroding. So instead of people having to do that stuff just can get taken care of automatically. Like Duncan said, this is like the drudge work that people really don't want to do, and it's a real pain for people to try and repair each time when they're searching through. But things like that. But I suppose what I just want to use my couple of minutes to go is just, I think the data improvement part is a great use of data science and AI, but it's by far, like there's many other areas. If you think of just the sort of planning applications process, never mind the wider sort of land and housing system, like all of these different types of areas, you've got different types of AI tools that can either do the thing or much more likely augment the thing to help people do those processes better and more quickly. And if you go to the next slide as well, I think the point that I'd like to make is that there's lots of individual things we know that data science and AI can already do, but I think I'd draw your attention to agentic systems, which are like it's like a hype and buzzy word. It's sort of annoying, isn't it? But it's also, with the reasoning models that came out from the big frontier labs 4 or 5 months ago, faculty we've been building like agentic models. It basically means they can do things in the world, in the real world, organize a workflow or go and interact with the world. We're doing that for a couple of years, but only really in the last 4 or 5 months have these things been able to be controllable, efficient, and cost-effective. Essentially, if you go to the next slide, so. Using that, we're starting to build these first agentic systems in other bits of the economy for mainly at the moment in the private sector, but some public service ones that we can't talk about. But applying that same principle to the world of planning, you can start to think, even in this obviously simplified diagram, there's particular sections that each one we could right here, right now, build small agent AI systems to be able to do or help with those different tasks. So, for instance, is the application valid? Can you just check against the validity? Can you do things like go backwards and forwards with a client to see whether or if it hasn't got all the information that it needs? We literally built tools like that do that sort of job in other sectors, and I think there's a beyond just the data side where we've both been working. There's more possibilities here, which I think are really interesting, particularly in the light of government trying to build 1.5 million more homes. And if you just go to the next, I think this is sorry, they've got really annoying click boxes, and then a little red one, because this stuff sounds like kind of madly futuristic. But if you just go to the next slide, like the MHCLG team with AI did the planning hack day a few weeks back, and one of our senior data scientists was in a team and did the thing of pulling together the history of a site. So you give the agentic AI the ability to go and pull these different documents together if they're associated with a particular geography, and sort of built. I think it was whatever it was. Was it a 1 day hackathon? I think rather than 2 days, yes, 2 days hackathon. So these things are sort of eminently doable. And it was funny at the presentation at the end, because I think it won the prize, that people thought it was like a video we made of mocking it up. But no, it's like, actually, no, it's real software. So these things, obviously it's not anywhere close to production ready after a couple of days. It's just a quick sketch. But I just want to kind of draw our attention to the fact that these types of services are eminently buildable. Not perfect, not easy always, with many other issues, but I think that are definitely doable. I think that's all I was going to say.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. And finally, Nissa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nissa. I'm a chartered planner, but I work as a digital planning lead at Arup. Before I begin, I love to ask this question because I always get a bright, different response in every room. How many of you have ever played SimCity? Oh, excellent. Usually it's about 50-50. So I played SimCity when I I'm not going to say how long ago, but when I was a child. And I remember thinking, this is fantastic. This is what I want to do as a grown up. And then I grew up and I realized you don't get to play SimCity in real life. Instead, when you study planning, you end up filling a lot of application forms and writing lots of reports. So I kind of left planning to do data science and somehow ended up potentially creating a real world version of SimCity. So what I do is it's difficult to explain what I do on a day-to-day basis. I like to say I play SimCity in real life. In reality, I hold people's hands and tell them that it's all going to be okay and that scary machine isn't going to take their jobs. And, you just have to think about what you're designing. And I do that internally with my team. I also do that externally with my clients. And that brings me to the kind of what I understand of where planning is going in the world of AI. My first point, the 200-page report. Now, I constantly have this conversation with many planners where they'll tell me, oh, ChatGPT is fantastic. I can write a 200-page report in 5 seconds. And I'm not even joking. The very same day I'll have a conversation with a client who'll go, oh, those 200-page reports I get, I love putting that through ChatGPT and it ends up summarizing it for me. It's fantastic. And I just don't understand why we don't have that conversation around not on the use of AI to do either of those things, but let's save AI a job and let's save ourselves a job and maybe get rid of the 200-page report and find new ways of doing things. That brings me to my second point, the critical thinking element, which we do a lot of green belt assessments as part of the work as Arup. Clients love giving us green belt assessments. I have sat in many meetings where I have listened to my colleagues argue about what constitutes as a boundary and what metrics we should use, and I can tell who the planners are in the room by whose eyes glazed over and who didn't. Now, looking at it from the outside, as a technologist, you'd go, okay, that's the bit we need to automate, the thinking bit, the argument, we need to get rid of that. And working in planning, I realized, actually, that's the bit you don't automate. That's the bit that people enjoy. That's the bit that planners like to come into work for and go, I like having that conversation. I like knowing coming up with a strategy. I like the creativity around it. The bit that we need to be automating, the bit that we need to be using AI for is actually what information could we get quicker, more accurately, more accurately in a timely manner that can help me, that can facilitate this conversation so that we can identify what boundaries we want to break next. And that brings me to the third point, which is which actually I wouldn't even say it's the third point, it's the main point. AI isn't about automating the planner's role. It's about enabling the planner's role. You can't automate a planner. You can't get rid of the planner from the system. You still need that critical thinking. You still need that human behind it. If anything, you should be looking at what can AI do to enable the planner to do the job that they set out to do. What can we do with AI so that I can get to play SimCity? And I realize it might not happen by the time I retire, but I really hope someday a new graduate will come to me and thank me for helping create that dream job that a lot of us didn't get to do, and maybe getting rid of those horrible planning applications and advert consents and all those things that traumatized me in planning when I started. So what I'd say about AI in planning is actually there's a lot we can do with it. There's a lot we can do to help planners do the job that they need to do, and we can do a lot with it to make planning collaborative, more exciting, more fun, and maybe less about writing 200-page reports really quickly and then going and summarizing them really quickly.
Brilliant, thank you, Nissa. Yeah, how can we free planners to plan, but also like avoid an arms race like the one I talked about between AI NIMBYs and YIMBYs? We kind of already have a bit of that sometimes with different 200-page reports. So yeah, it's super interesting. So we're going to go through some questions. I've got a few for the panel, but then we'll open it up to the floor. I'm going to start with you, Duncan. So I'm aware that obviously you're involved in the Extract project, but there was another really interesting one at IAI around analysing consultation responses that's very relevant to planning. I guess what have you learned already about like the different approaches to designing and applying AI, and like what are the conditions for success almost?
Well, I think the short answer is we don't know what the conditions for success are, because they can be, it's almost like what are the conditions for success of any given project. AI can do a lot of different things, and we're kind of figuring out, I think, the vocab, as you said, for some of that stuff. Concretely, in the case of, just to take Extract as an example, I think there are three things which maybe amount to conditions for success there. The first is give someone a fish and they can eat the fish, right? But if you teach them how to fish, then obviously they can continue to eat fish, for forever, until the end. And providing data is like that. Like the promise of AI that was sold, I think, maybe 18 months ago, was that this guy was this magic sort of oracle that was going to just provide you the ready packaged information in this way. That's kind of not really something that you can rely on. Maybe it will never be something you can rely on. But when you've got like a verifiable output that you can look at and say this is correct, that's locked in, it's yours, and you can have it and keep it and compute upon it. And I think that it's very exciting to me that Extract will be done one day, like in the sense that we'll have looked at all of the historical documents, we'll need a plan for the documents we make in the future, but we no longer have that massive kind of legacy of confusion and uncertainty and probably hugely contradictory information somewhere kind of hanging over us. So that's the first thing. You can have an output. That's really good. The second thing is that this wouldn't make sense at all without all the work that MHCLG did. They spent years making these incredible schemas. If you go to that planningdata.gov.uk website, it is unbelievably rich and fully featured and detailed. It's really well documented. And the fact that that consensus has already been established among the community of those who will consume this data is a really key enabling thing for this project. Otherwise, we'd be moving a bit faster than some of the other data producers, but we would just be one more competing standard in a world of 20 competing standards. Then you've got 21 competing standards. And finally, I think that we need a way in all these systems, and Consult is the same, Consult being a consultation analysis tool, where you can effectively really consciously move the dial of automation when you start to go beyond potentially just parsing data and into maybe automating some decision making or something like that. That is such contingent and risky terrain, and you need people in the loop there. How many people, how far in the loop, what does the loop look like? Is it more of a machine in the loop than a person in the loop? You need to be able to control that quite carefully. And like having just a dial you can turn in terms of, we've just got the data, now we're going to try automating this particular subfamily of decisions and look at that and really evaluate it and be very rigorous about it, is a really key sort of enabling quality for such a system. You don't have to go all the way into the magic mirror, get the oracle that's unreliable. You can actually govern and control a lot of this stuff for yourself, and that's very empowering.
Well, thank you, Duncan. Saw some of the early show and tells for Extract, and another thing that really stood out to me was how important content design is. So as well as being able to point to the data standards, which had gone through a big design process, as you say, so that they are well understood and kind of bought into by the industry, there seemed to be a big uptick when the AI was given the kind of human-focused content design guidance for how to create the data in the first place. And yeah, being precise with our words when we're using AI, I think feels really important as well. Paul, I'm going to jump on to you. So what, in your experience, because obviously you've experienced various phases of kind of digital transformation in government, what is it about AI that gives you hope that we can kind of surmount some of the barriers that previous initiatives and digital transformation approaches have floundered on a little?
Well, it's a good question. I think, more generally across public services, it's just the deep need we see. I mean, you only have to interact with any sort of public service. My daughter was trying to get a driving test sorted out. It's like, oh my word, it's like really broken. So almost like every bit of the state that you touch has at the moment seems to have a backlog, people struggling for having the funding and just getting through things. And that is essentially as AI has sort of gone from the periphery of doing, analytical projects in an interesting new way with interesting new data, as it's sort of on its journey to kind of center stage of our core operational processes of the state, just the burning platform of need is true. And I think that's also true in the planning domain, and I say backed by the political imperative around infrastructure and building the houses. You can feel that coalition there. I think a second thing that gives me more hope in this space is when you think back to those days in 2017 or wherever it was when we were setting this up. You could have counted the people that understood what on earth we were on about on one hand, sort of thing, and we would get together as a little group, wouldn't we? And we'd sort of talk about this. And the struggle internally that myself and my small team at the time went through to try and explain what on earth we were on about, why on earth we thought that this was a thing, how on earth it could help, and the process to show bit by bit that value was accrued as we went through that process was really, really, really hard. And then to see, now, not really my involvement at all, of course, just a big community of people really focused on this issue, really understanding the different possibilities, teasing through things, using things. That sort of momentum is just in a very, very different place from what it was before. I think the third thing is about is fundamentally the software that the system uses. And this has been problematic, particularly in local government, but also in central government, where we've tended towards monopoly or duopoly in each sort of domain in a full stack system that is not built in a more modular way. And there are different, sometimes that's changing. And in digital planning, against one of the areas we put time and energy into to be able to create alongside local government things like Plan X and BOPs and those sort of services, which I think are giving a really different modular, digital first, if you can call it that, way of thinking about doing the processing. But you're also seeing the sort of the incumbent suppliers understanding that this is changing and shifting. And I feel more hopeful about that than I had before. But I do think that if you like, the digital which call it like a revolution that GDS brought in, Government Digital Service brought into central government processes, whereby now if you apply for your thing online, it's a fabulously boring, elegant experience that just happens in seconds. That, remember, it didn't used to be like that. You used to have to go and find a printer that worked and then queue up in the post office or whatever. So that bit of government has changed like really dramatically and profoundly in a really good way. But the caseworking, processing, operational bits of government look like they did when I joined government in 2004, was it, right? So this is the bit where I think there's a sense that there's a revolution coming for that core operational software in the way that we saw in GDS perhaps 10 years ago or so. So that's the bit that, but are we, is the question. That's the bit where I'm more doubtful.
Thanks, Paul. We're going to move on to kind of issues of kind of risk and transparency. And Nissa, I'm going to give this one to you. So, how do we ensure that any AI systems that we use in planning are explainable and auditable and avoid replicating bias? But also, how transparent do you think the planning system is now? How do we reconcile those two things?
That's a lot of questions in one question, Steph. So, I think the first thing about transparency and making sure that we have a system that is transparent, you need to design it to be transparent. I had a conversation with someone who'd done a lot of research into AI in other parts of the world and was telling me about the system that they're using in China, where they very excitedly talked about how they created the system and it came up with an answer. No one knows how it came up with the answer and how it's become really smart. And I was like, that doesn't sound like a smart AI system. That sounds like an idiot designed it. Like, who designs a system where you don't know how it came to that conclusion? So I think it has to be purposeful. It has to be purposefully designed so that any decision, first of all, I wouldn't say rely on AI for decision making. Rely on AI to give you all that information so that the human can make the decision. And then purposefully design it so that you can see where that information comes from and how it got there in the first place. As for the planning system where it stands currently, I wouldn't say it's not transparent. It's transparent but difficult to find where that information comes from. So you'll have this conversation with anyone who has had to deal with the planning system, has talked about how there's an art to finding evidence on a council's website, and none of it is done intentionally. I know there's that whole, oh, this is, it's the council trying to hide things. It's not. It's just no one's thought the process through. Again, this is a system that hasn't been designed to make it transparent. It hasn't been designed with a purpose to make it transparent. It's been designed to just get everything online so that so you can get access to it. I think that's changing. I think that's people are being more careful about signposting, and then a lot of this goes to your earlier comment about content design. If you can, the information's there. Most information in planning is meant to be public anyway. It's just a matter of knowing where to find it. And of course, historically, we haven't paid that much attention to it. Therefore, it's not being as available, and you have experts. And as a graduate, you spend the first few years learning how to navigate a council's website. Again, that can be designed out. And that's how we should be looking at anything that we move forward to. Anything that we want to bring in the future is like design it not to meet the commercial purpose or the technical purpose. Design it to meet a human purpose, which is if I'm putting information out there, I must make it available and easy to find.
Well, thanks, Liz. Yeah, I think that we've had a little play in TPX with some AI to deal with that access point. There are still, and I agree with you, there shouldn't be 200-page documents, but any planning application will have an awful lot of evidence stacked behind it, and that, as you suggest, creates distrust. But we've tried with some AI to kind of retrieve information that's pertinent, and done a bit of testing with planners and developers around, is that the right information that should be presented? And it seems to be pretty decent. This was a small project, so I think, increasing transparency. Actually, AI could certainly potentially increase transparency. And the other point I'd make about Extract actually was, it was interesting when it was first announced. There was an awful lot of chatter on LinkedIn and various other social places about, but how did it do it? What did it do? And then a few days later, there was an excellent blog post from MHCLG that went through literally step by step what the project was, what the bits of what AI was doing, and showed how. And I think, in retrospect, that should have come alongside it. Like, we've got to explain things and what the AI is doing as we go.
So on that point, I completely agree. But we don't need to put that information in a 200-page document. The amount of planning statements that will start off with, this site is located X miles from this train station and down this road, and a lot of information you just don't need, or a lot of information you can just put onto a map. And sometimes it can be as simple as that.
Yeah.
Just think of new creative ways, creativity. I
guess that is the risk, isn't it? That the ability of AI to kind of find that information means that we don't seek to design it out. Yeah, really good. Paul, I'm going to jump back to you in terms of, and again, not necessarily planning specific, but your work across public and private kind of sector. What do you think are the capabilities that what capabilities should organizations invest in if they want to make the most out of AI and mitigate any risks?
So in many ways, I think it's very similar to other fields of where things are changing. So I don't think the answer that I have is that different from if we've been talking 10 years ago and talking about digital services in planning rather than AI in planning. Is that the most important thing, and I say this as someone that sat on the other side of the fence in the government world, was having people in your team that understood what we were buying and what was being offered to us, and having the capability not to necessarily do everything yourself. I don't think that's necessarily, I wouldn't advocate sort of only in-housing things in my team when I was in government, but having the ability to distinguish between, particularly in AI, where there is a lot of what shall I say, AI BS, and every company is an AI company and everything's an agentic thing, and it's like, it's kind of a bit weird being an AI company at the minute, because it's like, oh, hold on a minute, no, you're not. It's kind of it must be hard to distinguish between these different states on the other if you're a purchaser in a public authority. So either having that capacity yourselves, if you're of an organization that's big enough to do that in the public sector, or that you've got trusted advice from others. So the existence of IAI and Government Digital Service and all of those sorts of parts, of course, the MHCLG digital team have played a fabulous part in that, and increasingly local authorities have really competent digital technology teams too. That sort of advice is really, really important in order to make the change. The second thing, though, is I think it's the mindset of experimenting without deeply committing. It's just so many times people are like, well, once I've planned everything out and all eventualities have gone into my Gantt chart, and I've got all of my data all properly sorted, and in 25 years' time, maybe we'll do something with it. It's sort of soul-crushing, that sense of almost like reaching for I think sometimes folks reach for these things as reasons why you actually can't do a thing, rather than as a legitimate excuse. And I think embracing that sense of do a thing, try a thing, trial a thing, work it out, grow it and iterate it. But do the thing and have the curiosity and the permissions of your teams to be able to do that. I think that for me is understand what it is that you're buying and being offered, and have the mindset of doing, trialing, testing things, because otherwise you're never going to learn about it. And anyway, the technology is moving so quickly, the risk of stasis and paralysis is, I think, a very real one.
Really interesting. A great bridge to my next question for Duncan, actually, which was kind of how do you see the digital centre of government, as it's now called, how do you see it evolving in light of AI being applied to more areas, to maybe policy design, maybe more digital services, and where kind of models are being created as you are and open sourcing them? Like, how does that change? Do we still need GDS phases, the service standards?
I mean, that's a big question. I think sorry. I mean, I think I completely agree with everything Paul's just said. One of the most powerful things that GDS did early on was have spend controls on department to stop them procuring basically bad IT. And right now, departments have this onslaught of kind of half-baked commercial like AI solutions, many of which are just like in-house projects that this is anecdotes, consultancies will come up with in-house things, potentially then voice them on customers. I maybe don't quote me on that, but there is a lot to cut through in terms of what's in the market right now. I think the centre needs to enable people to do that experimentation. I think it also needs to set some sensible boundaries on what's acceptable and what's kind of actually assurable. I think if you're, they're trying to do the algorithmic transparency reporting standard, where effectively if you've got an AI application, then you basically say what it is. That's a really immature thing right now, and it overlaps really heavily, really interestingly, with the service standard. It goes into, how, like, why are you doing this? How are you doing it? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? At the same time, it's true that the service standard and the service manual are like a bit long in the tooth now. The rate of churn on those things has really decreased and diminished. And the way we produce work, digital work, is changing with AI too. So whereas previously something that happens in incubators quite a lot is that people will be able to put together working prototypes of the sort that Paul's just shown at the drop of a hat, basically, whereas this would have been a bigger multidisciplinary team working for longer to do something which is going to change less quickly. And we need to kind of figure out how that really needs to work. There is still, you can't just have these kind of like super people who are this kind of fusion of all of the skills there. You've got to still have rounded teams. You've got to still have peer review, and people need to be able to develop with each other and form bonds and communities of practice. I think AI kind of like, and especially the hype, like really kind of wants to challenge that. And I think government needs to take a bit of a stand on what sort of skills actually people ought to be developing and bringing to that stuff, because it's not just this magic factory of all the work you could ever want to do. I think that's an interesting role for government to play in the centre.
And As you know, the role of government in the centre kind of evolves. Nissa, how do you see? You've touched a bit on kind of your SimCity dream, but you're also probably feeling some of the evolution now within your professional practice. What do you see as the role of the planner being in the, let's say, 10 years' time? How might it have changed?
To actually do the planning rather than the admin around it. I think one of the questions we get a lot. So when I've always said when it comes to consultancy, a good consultant fills in gaps in the market and then finds another gap to fill in. They don't create a cycle of I'm just going to do that work instead for government instead and get paid a lot more. And I think if you're a good consultancy, you see the work that the government's doing in planning and how they're getting better and more streamlined with using digital, and then you find ways to continue helping out with that. So one of the things that we focus on is as planners, you create a lot of data. How do we ensure that we are creating data in a format that's reusable, that goes into this golden thread, and that we can give back to work with local authorities to help them create that digital system that works? And how can what's the next step after that? What's the next step after that for planning? How can we make better decisions? So I find the role for planners is becoming more about planning. It's more about making the right decisions, being able to trace where that information came from, less about filling in long application forms for advert consents, and more about actually spending time doing the critical thinking around it. And that's why I think a lot of the work that's going on with central government and at local authority level is fantastic, because you're finally getting to do the things you want to do. You're not just a project manager anymore to make sure that they get the evidence-based documents. The time you get to spend more time analysing, assessing, and helping clients and private sector clients as well, not just public sector, across making the right decision.
Yeah, so I think what you said there about the idea, like maybe in the future, planners will do the planning and not admin. That is a thing for me, which feels like the big driver for what public service reform is going to look like over the next, 5-10 years. And how much how many folks here have worked either with or in local or central government, in these really critical services, the proportion of time spent doing admin versus doing the actual thing that the system is there for, it's wrong. It's not. We can do better than this, folks. And for me, this is almost like the sort of moral drive, if you like, for this, because AI is not a straightforward discipline. There's so many things that are rightly contested or difficult or challenging about it as a field. But for me, that's the lodestar almost of going, actually, our public services should spend their time and energy doing the thing that actually they're meant to do, rather than all the bump and the drudge that goes around that, because so much money and energy and time and careers are sucked up into that versus the real thing. And I think that for me is your earlier question about what's the sort of the hope in this that isn't the sort of the hope, not the hype or something. I don't know. I can't remember how you phrased it, but that for me is the thing we should remember and keep striving for.
Brilliant, thank you. Hot Pizza is here, so that means it's time for questions from the audience.
Hi, Chris Wright from Basics. I'm new to the planning sector. I just wanted to get an idea of the scale of the problem. You were mentioning the slogs, the 200-page documents. If we go back to the noughts, kind of the start of this century, as the document load now, it's got more and more digital increased. Is it double, quadrupled? Is it the same volume, or are you experiencing massive document overload in the planning system?
I'll take this a little bit, and then Nissa can pass it on. Nissa can build or add or disagree. I think that the tendency has been to grow. I was talking to someone who works in the profession, let's say, I'll keep up, and they can remain nameless. There's a bit of an arms race sometimes around, as Nissa suggested, the amount of evidence or data that's needed to justify any decisions. So I think, yeah, it's certainly on an upward trend. And as I suggested, like AI might make that worse unless the system is more prescriptive, perhaps, about what data should be used in what context to justify what decisions. But I don't know what you think, Nissa.
I think we do get asked for a lot more documents because you can produce them quicker, and everyone loves a PDF. I say that sarcastically. But I don't think it's just necessarily that we're being asked for more documents. I think we now have access to a lot more information at a lot quicker rate, and as a consequence of that, there's more evidence going into the planning system. But we still have that problem but we need a document to capture it all. So off the back of that, yes, we are getting more documents, but I'm hoping, the way I see it is like, we're getting more evidence. Oh, we need more documents to cover that. But I'm hoping we reach a point where we go, actually, could we put all that evidence again in tables and in formats that are more digestible, and move into a system where it's more visually appealing and not 200 pages, but maybe 1 page. I say we're getting more evidence because of technology. We have access to zoom out and zoom in at different scales. And I think that's a good thing because it helps us make decisions that are in context. It helps us make decisions that take account of not just what you see in front of you, but of the things that other sectors and collaborators can help you out with. But that has meant more documents for the time being. But I see the future being there'll be less documents as we realize you don't need to capture everything in a brand new document.
Thanks. So, the questions? Yes.
Yeah. So at the moment, the kind of cabinet secretary is walking around saying that the public sector is a technological laggard, and the prime minister is very, very keen on AI and made that quite clear as part of the London Tech Week speech that he gave to the Launch Extract, which we talked about. If you're a local authority chief executive and there's a choice in front of you to build or buy services that help you to deliver things on top of everything else that you have to do, how do you go about making that decision? How should you go about making that decision? So I think kind of that's the very nub of the choice being put forward in the public sector today.
I did work in a local authority for a couple of years in Leicestershire, but I spent most of my time in government, in central government. And what would often happen, government departments chug along happily, unhappily as it might be, and something will happen, a bad thing will happen. And the cry from the sort of every director general in that situation is, I need 1,000 more civil servants to work this thing. It's never like, I need a system that makes this work, or almost my hope is that in this sort of next phase, people go, actually, to deal with this problem, I need some proper software and some well-regulated data. And I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that there's it's not just the technical processes that folks have to go through, but there's almost like a self-affirming culture that I had to work within and try and mold and shape and sometimes rail against, which is at times I found was like a delight in its lack of technical knowledge. Oh, I don't know how anything I don't even know how to turn my computer on. Was said many times, and not get the joke. They wouldn't get a laugh in front of the digital team, right? And I think that is, to me, is the biggest manageable hurdle to get over. I think those things are trade-off. If I've got to pay for do I pay for the acute thing or the thing that prevents it in the near future? They're really hard trade-offs, and people have got ways of working through that. And I don't want to make it sound trite, because those decisions are hard. And I think actually local authority and central government folks make those decisions pretty well. For me, it's more the cultural assumption that we need more humans to do more long-winded human processes rather than embrace a sort of technology which is, frankly, 20, 30 years old sometimes, would be a big leap forward. Maybe that's better now.
Lisa?
So I think we kind of tend to jump into the whole, oh, we've got a problem. What's the technological solution we throw at it? Do we build it? Do we buy it? I think there's a step before that kind of goes, what's the process? Actually, do we need, what's the actual problem? It's not, we need to digitize faster. We need to, we need access to digital things cheaper. It's like, what can we do better using the technology lens? And then going, actually, now we can look at, are we going to buy it or build it? Fix the problem, actually understand what the problem is first, understand what we're looking for. Are we trying to, are we trying to get more information? Are we trying to do things faster? Are we trying to communicate better? And then look at, don't get into the whole, we really need to digitize because that's what government's told us to do. So actually, what's the problem we need to solve? And then look at, what's the solution to it? Because sometimes it's not even the technological solution. It's not a product. It's not that you just need to open up channels of communication. You need to collaborate more. You need to make the process simpler.
Just very, very briefly on that culture point, which is so central. This cuts both ways. It's not just that there needs to be more literacy around technology among those who are quote unquote non-technical, but it's also that digital has, for better or worse, existed as a silo and existed as a place of gatekeeping. And one of the fun and chaotic things about AI is that it really enables people to just punch through that barrier quite quickly. So as a layperson, it's totally plausible that I could go and put together a prototype of the thing that I want in my job without needing to sort of rely on the procurement or whatever needs to happen within my department. And I think that that's where most of the good ideas are probably going to come from in these spaces. And digital still has a role to empower. It really ought to be dissolving into the rest of the organization, and hopefully this will speed that.
I think there's another option between buy or build, which is, and it was alluded to earlier, the polite version is mess around and find out. Actually, how can government kind of create the safe space or the cover or encourage even inappropriate and context in appropriate ways, but people can try now. There's an awful lot you can do with zero tech knowledge that helps you get a little bit further along in understanding what the root cause of the problem might be, to Nissa's point. And also I was deeply encouraged by kind of, IAI open sourcing stuff. There's, I should think, an awful lot that, especially in a federated planning system where MHCLG create the rules to a certain extent, how can central government build the things that everyone can use, which is what they intend to for extract. So another question down here. Yes,
thank you very much for the presentation. This is just a question about extract. So pardon my ignorance, I did not read the blog that you mentioned. I know that the coverage when Keir Starmer announced it was saying that it used Google Gemini. So I just wanted some understanding on how this intersection between AI companies and AI models works to make extract.
Right. Okay. So
I can take it if it feels a bit risky for you.
No. I think it's pretty straightforward, which is that Gemini has some capabilities that other models don't. Google has quietly been overtaking everyone else in terms of cutting edge features in their models. Gemini is really good at visual processing. It's particularly good at maps. And it's also, with sort of reasoning capabilities, been extremely useful for us to understand, what do all the crossings out in a document amount to in a way that traditional optical character recognition, PDF parsing, really doesn't. So that was very much a best tool for the job kind of decision rather than a commercially or politically driven one.
Just one more. So Christopher Wandell, View City. So we're working on an incredible web map. Thankfully funded by MHCLG. Yes, it's going to have some great sort of brevity and some great elegance to it, where you can go in and see the developments and the timeline, and people within the council can see that. Members of the public can see that. It's going to be pretty revolutionary when it gets sort of released. Now, my hesitation is it's always going to point back to legal jargon, legal documents, and I don't hear anyone wanting to cut through all of that. When we see these massive documents stuffed with words, It's the total opposite of what the best communicators in the world do. I had a really great time in New York where I could spend a lot of time with novelists and writers and even poets. And these were people who would rewrite and rewrite, sometimes throw the whole book away and just rewrite it again, which I thought was absolutely mad. But it actually was a really great thing because time is the best editor because the important stuff you remember, the rest falls away. And I don't see any focus on brevity, on communication, on keeping people focused when you're communicating local plans to the public. All these ridiculous different processes, Reg 19, etc. You're losing people at every single turn when you start saying this. So I would like less legal jargon, less official council talk, more human language and more brevity. And I don't hear anyone talking about that. So we can make the best technology in the world, but if it points back to that word salad, to normal people, we're not going to get as far as we hope.
So the one I always remember is curtilage of a dwelling house. Hands up if you come across that, right? It's like, what on earth? And I think that it was one of the first, when I went to be chief digital officer, it's one of the first services I stopped. So it's like, he had a little explainer. It said, oh, what does this mean? It's like, well, exactly. And it said, oh, a dwelling house is a place you live. And it's like, okay, I could have worked that bit out, but what on earth's a curtilage? Didn't anyway. So this thing around good quality content design, I think it's kind of interesting that I don't know if you find this well documented, but some of the systems that we make, some of the success of them on sort of whether you're doing sort of a deep learning model or using sort of frontier models and fine tuning them, it's the curation of the data, curation around the data makes a really important difference still as to how well then the model performs afterwards. It's striking to me that the role of content design is useful even when you're talking about machines to machines. But I think just the thing I was going to say is, well, VSIT is a great example because I think when we're talking about brevity, it's like there's different ways of talking about things, right? Well, the best way of talking about things is show the thing, right? Now, to be able to have that 3D model of the city or the building, to be able to see that and communicate that, well, you know, your famous Nope poster, how many times have we used that picture? And I've used it many times. You know, the difference of that when we put time and energy in on the digital planning program when I was in that role to be able to do the consultation type activity. Such an important part of the planning system is that essentially is where politics of space happens, isn't it? Planning. And now to be able to do that in a way that can communicate with a real, realistic 3D model that you can walk around or see and explore, well, that gets over your section of the 1947 Town and Country Planning Act poster shoved on a lamppost. It's just a different way of being able to get at that. So I think, yes, brevity in language, and weirdly, brevity in language helps in some aspects of machine learning as well. But when we're communicating to people, let's start with what people want to see and feel. And actually, VSIT is a great example of that.
Yes,
So a few years ago, I did a piece of work at Cambridge where we looked at social media posts back when Twitter was still Twitter to understand how people felt about the area and the new local plan that was coming out. And there was a lot of analysis around words like the difference between how people react to the word house versus home. Dwelling didn't turn up anywhere, surprise, surprise, except for a few planners posts. So there is a lot in how we use language and what it means and the motive nature behind it. But there is also, on the planning side, you have to remember planning can be quite litigious. I've gotten in trouble as a graduate because I used in a report about housing, I wrote housing rather than dwelling, and called something homes rather than units. And someone came back to me saying that's the wrong language to use. It's not so much about the communication with the client, it's when this goes to pins, when this gets held up at examination. So there is that balance of, completely agree, we need to make planning more accessible. We need to understand how people react to the things that we put out there in planning and language has a very big role in it. But there is also that balance of, but certain words get used in a certain way in planning law, and we still have to abide by that so that we don't get in trouble later on. So the question really kind of goes back to you. What do we do about it without, what can we do without getting into trouble with one or the other? And how do we find that balance in this kind of world?
I do think that the opportunity of AI is to do that translation really quickly, like actually to have a front end that it doesn't need to be relied on in court, and where you still have the jargon in the background. My view is you could rewrite quite a bit of legislation to make it clearer, but we are where we are. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of hope there still of being able to communicate things more meaningfully, more quickly, because it is quite hard to get a content designer to completely redesign a local plan that appeals to non-planners.
So we had that problem with the same Cambridge example, where we came up with American Cemetery, which most of the social media posts were about how beautiful it was and how it's such a great place to go around. And if you read every single message on their own, it was all positive. But the analysis kept coming back as negative, and we couldn't understand why. And then someone realized it's cemetery. The large language model has been trained to associate cemetery with death, and death is negative. So you can still get that mistake with large language models. They're not trained, and they're trained on specific language and specific ways of speaking. So yes, it's a great initial step, but I would say it's years away from being able to help us actually capture everything without any bias.
I've got time for a few more questions. Alex?
Thank you. Hi everyone, Alex, DXW. Is there a danger that AI becomes the presentation layer on the data? The planning system becomes very mechanistic. We could today or 10 years ago, local authorities could have demanded planning application data as structured data. They haven't, probably wrongly, but and they still communicate the local plans as documents. But that does allow for a story to be told. That does allow for visions to be put forward and pushed and to challenge the convention or the whatever the apparent needs of the day are. I'm worried that AI becomes the presentation layer on top of the data, and we lose the ability for creatives or visionaries to push forward places in interesting ways.
I speak to that. I think that's such an interesting question, and I think the pendulum is probably going to swing on this a few ways back and forth. It's just kind of becoming possible now to have a sort of just-in-time presentation of data. You can go to Claude and say, or you will shortly be able to go to Claude and say, here's a website, make it into a GovUK website with the same information in it. And you could have that in your web browser, and you could just browse in your own little aesthetic bubble, whatever. It's going to really, really change the web. And what that sort of moves towards potentially is a world where where there's just facts underneath and then presentation layer on top. Something Richard Pope says in his book Platformland about the way that cooperating systems can kind of work really efficiently together, and basically you can sort of magically receive a notification that you're eligible for housing benefit when such and such happens. He makes this point that you want to sort of like put a seam into the system at some point so you can understand a bit about maybe why something's happened or how it happened. And I think that idea of like really deliberately, I think going back to some what you were saying there about some narrative, like kind of the we're going to want to consciously reinsert some of that stuff. And that's a problem we've never had before. Like we've just been drowning in narrative, and now that work of sense making is kind of like almost been taken away from us, and we are going to need to reassert it. I've got no idea what that's going to look like, but it's going to be kind of weird and novel. I just think it's a really good question.
Gentleman there.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Tony Mulhall from RICS. We're very interested in building capacity among our members in this area. I'm a chartered surveyor and town planner by background, but I don't have any capabilities in terms of AI. But I do have a question about interoperability between systems. The planning system operates within a local authority within which there are many other systems. It also interoperates with other systems outside of it, like Ordnance Survey, like Land Registry. Does your AI system, is it capable of interacting with all of these? Because for a long time, people spoke about this challenge of interoperability between different systems, between different contractors, between different models. Is your AI going to evolve into something that makes everything interrogatable by everybody all the time?
It's a good question. So how do I answer that? So in theory, that's the idea, right? And literally a lot of the systems we will build for government, but for not government as well, are all just modern digital. They're interacting with modern digital systems, or indeed the web or people, and actually the ability to interrogate data through APIs, or indeed, send emails to people through an agent. You can do those things too. It makes something very real of a more interoperable systems that already exist. Where it comes unstuck is where you've got slightly old school, big full stack systems that have been designed on purpose not to be interoperable. That's where it gets difficult. And in some bits of government, and particularly in local government, that is deeply true and has been a problem for other parts of the system in trying to get the system to move forward and reform. Hence things like Plan X and BOPS and those other alternative delivery systems that folks have been working on in planning with local authorities over the last little while. But I think your question highlights the fact that this may become a much deeper problem when you've got AI systems and the promise of doing things actually in a radically different way, in a radically more efficient way. People might not grumble quite so much and might go, actually, it's time to do something different here. Is it worth the candle to bite the bullet to redo the software system in these areas? It could be.
And I think there's some of the lack of interoperability comes from professions. They were purposely built in their own silos to be expert at their own things. And whilst you might be able to get the technology to talk to each other, can you get the professions to pass each other? So one of the challenges at the AI planning hackathon was precisely that. Like NISTA has now a national model of infrastructure capacity of electricity, transport, water, I think. And the challenge was, how do you get that to operate at like lower levels, like regional and local level, but also how do you understand different trade-offs? If we invested more in water and less and invested in electricity network quicker, how much value of home would be new homes would be generated? And that was a really hard challenge. No one got anywhere with it because of those kind of the different siloed professional rules almost. So I think there's something interesting there to see, as I started at the beginning, like how might AI be able to understand the rules of different professions and do some of that talking between them, not coming up with the answer, but kind of helping to talk between those professional bits of data and information. I've got one more question, James.
Just a question of barrister and planning. A good question about officers' reports. This is a pivotal point, the officers' report for a decision. Are we getting to a position where the majority of officers' reports, that's 99% text, in those reports has been written by AI? And if that's the case, how do we build back a culture of human verification and interrogation of those reports? As a consequence, it rises because Duncan said, we don't want to make the decision. But I noticed on the right-hand side of your slide, Paul, you effectively had it make a recommendation in the bottom, like the final decision being made by the UB. And so, to build on Mrs. point about, we want plans to still have tasks to do and to join them. What do we envisage officers' reports looking like in the ideal situation? So how do we ensure that human involvement?
So the question around officers' reports as a level of planning knowledge outside my capability. So let me answer more broadly. I think so. The diagram I showed is just like a hypothetical of these are things you can do, and I think what's interesting is that already 4 or 5 months on from the reasoning models becoming just generally apparent, generally consumable. Already those technologies are surpassing mine and my colleagues' understanding of what you would expect something like that to be able to do. And this is just baby steps in this technology, right? And things like assessing a case decision, just forget planning on any sort of like, government or commercial thing, to go, we've got a set of rules, we've got a set of historical context, we've got a thing in front of us, can you come to a reasoned decision about this given that context? We found already to be like way beyond our expectations of being, human level competent. And it's like, now, do we want to do that or not want to do that? Is that a good thing to do or not a good thing to do? What on earth does that mean in terms of the law, in terms of process and other things? But I think I suppose the point I'd like to make is just don't think that those capabilities aren't coming or aren't already there in some cases. They're coming. Their choice is now, what and why do we hold in different domains of automatable, non-automatable? Sometimes that will be a legal decision, a moral decision, political decision, or an efficiency decision.
Just to add a rider to that, I think that one thing that's been true so far, and there's no reason to assume it won't continue to be true with AI, is that effectively there are sort of diminishing returns both in the course of your interaction with the model, just like the conversation goes on quite long, the quality noticeably degrades. And then also in terms of from interaction to interaction, if you as a person are trying to learn something or get your head into some sort of context, then it's not going to help if the AI is doing all the thinking. So it's not so much just the one person reviewing one AI generated decision at one time. It's like that person's reviewing capabilities potentially kind of like degrading over time if they're not themselves immersing themselves to some extent in that. And I think it's part, again, I think of that sort of deliberate pushing the person back into the process. I think you'd be mad to have an AI write a legal document of any sort right now, both because it would be a bit wrong in subtle and unverifiable ways, but also because of that really significant risk. And as a law firm, what happens to your bottom line then when your things just gradually are like declining in quality?
But for the local authority, that's the key question as the decision. What's your view on that? I appreciate you can't speak for governments, but what's your view on local authorities then writing that decision? The report which accompanies the decision.
I don't know enough about using an AI to draft the final report. Right. So I think that one of the things that digitized planning data points towards is that the output of a decision is no longer just a document which is going to be fed back into an AI system to parse it. So the outputs probably will change. We have to have that legal document as well because it has legal validity. So it needs to be produced and treated, according to the local authority's risk appetite as a legal document. I think it's attempting to automate that is quite an undertaking right now. Maybe things will develop in that direction. Maybe we'll just decide that AI documents carry this kind of taint and we don't really want to kind of risk putting them forward. It's going to be a strange world.
I was going to say that the AI the officer's report is a perfect example of one person using AI to write a report, another person using AI to summarize it. I just don't think there is that need. If we're at that point where we're getting AI to write it, should we even be writing that much of it? I'm working with a council right now where they're looking at automating. I've worked with multiple councils looking at automating how to gather housing numbers, but this one, there's this. The person in charge goes, I looked through the planning officer's report. I wish they were in machine readable PDFs because I just need 2 lines and I have to sit there and read through this entire thing. Maybe it's time to kind of question the officer's report, whether they need to exist, but do they need to exist in the format that they do right now? You don't need to write again what is. Actually, how many of you have actually read an officer's report? And I just opened it. How many of you read it from beginning to end? And I know your hand's staying up, but yeah. I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of information in there, and a lot of information you don't need it in that format. You might have you might have back when people came up with it. It was a great thing. The world's moved on. We need to start collecting and communicating that information in a different way. And so maybe less of the conversation around be AI writing that report. Do we need the report to be in that format?
Wonderful. Thank you for your brilliant questions. We're going to have to stop there because the pizza is now warm, probably verging on cool. So thanks very much for your time. Thanks very much to all of our speakers. If you could show your appreciation in the traditional way.